Welcome back. You're still watching Morning Live. Now, the arrest of the Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich in Russia has yet again shone the spotlight on media freedom. Russia's deputy foreign minister has acknowledged that the journalist had not been granted consular access 2 weeks after his arrest. The Wall Street Journal journalist was arrested in Russia on claims of espionage, which he denies. Earlier this week, U.S. President Joe Biden declared the journalist's imprisonment illegal after the State Department classified the reporter as wrongfully detained. The arrest of the journalist on March 29th has caused outrage and is seen as a serious escalation of Moscow's crackdown on the media. Now, joining us on Zoom to tell us more is Wall Street Journal's Deputy Bureau Chief for Africa, Gabriele Steinhauser. Good morning, Gabriele. Welcome to Morning Live. Perhaps let us get a background on the journalist that we're speaking to, who is the first U.S. journalist to be detained on espionage charges in Russia for almost 40 years.
Yes, so Evan is a 31-year-old, relatively young, but still quite experienced reporter. He's a U.S. citizen, but his parents actually were born and raised in the Soviet Union, in the former Soviet Union, and emigrated to the U.S. in the 1970s. And he grew up in the U.S., just outside New York, speaking Russian at home, learning a lot about Russian culture, really, having a very close relationship to this country. And then after he graduated college, he got his first job at the New York Times in New York City. And a colleague of his suggested to him, listen, you speak Russian, you have this kind of knowledge of Russia through your family, why don't you go there and, take a crack at being a foreign correspondent? And he hesitated a bit, but that's what he, ended up doing. And he moved to Moscow around 5.5 years ago, started working for the Moscow Times, an English language newspaper there. Then he worked for AFP, the, French news agency. And then he joined us just over a year ago at the beginning of 2022. And what kind of made Evan's story stand out is that he really got on the ground as a reporter. He spoke to people. He was, sort of delivering to the world this really valuable on the ground reporting from Russia at a time where what is happening in Russia is really important for everybody.
What was it about the Russian story that drew him to it and telling the story from the ground?
I think it was many things, but on the one hand, I think was his love for Russia and for, a country that he knew was much more diverse, or knows that it is much more diverse than, it is often given credit for. And at the same time, this is one of the biggest stories in the world right now, that I think any ambitious young reporter wants to, get their hands on a big story like that, and, also just tell the world about, the thinking, what ordinary Russians are thinking, what the Russian leadership is thinking, what's happening on the ground. And that's what he did.
And, there are reports that President Putin could personally have approved the arrest of Evan on charges of spying for the United States. I mean, what are you hearing and how true are these reports?
So, I have no insight into, whether the Russian president is involved or not. What I can say is that the charges against him are false. We, as the Wall Street Journal, as his employer and his previous employers, know that he was there as a journalist reporting. That's what he was doing. His arrest is wrong, and the U.S. government has declared it so, as have, media organizations around the world, as have other governments. And I think that's the really important thing to keep in mind, is that he should be freed. He, I think any journalist arrested is an attack on all of us and on press freedom and on, everybody's freedom ultimately.
And what are you hearing from the Russian government or on the ground about how is he doing his state at the moment?
So he is being kept in Levertovo prison, which is quite a notorious prison where a lot of dissidents and other government critics have been kept. He has not been allowed consular access so far, which, is against international law. But his lawyers that have been hired by the Wall Street Journal have now been able to see him a few times, and they have reported back that he's, in reasonably good spirits, in reasonably good health. That is, taking into account that he is being kept on his own in a cell for the past 3 weeks, nearly. He has also now, just on Friday, his family received the first letter from him, which I know was very heartening to them, and also for his colleagues, in which he said that he's not losing hope. He's writing, he's exercising, and he's just trying to keep his spirits up. And he promised his family that he would see them again as soon as possible.
And I can imagine for any parent that must be so heartbreaking. What are you hearing from his parents? Because I imagine you have to keep your hope as well, hope alive as well as a parent, hoping that your child actually returns home.
Yeah, I think, on the one hand, this is obviously, like you said, it's every parent's nightmare because they grew up in the Soviet Union. They kind of, their son is now kept in the kind of prison that they grew up hearing, and that is obviously terrifying. It's very difficult, if not impossible, for them to they haven't been able to directly communicate with him beyond this letter. So that is unsettling, of course. I know, on the other hand, that they have been really heartened by the global outpouring that we have seen for Evan, not just from the journal, us colleagues here, but sports teams, other governments, and just civilians around the world who have been writing to him. Some of his friends have set up a system where they translate letters that people write to him into Russian, so that he, can get at least a glimpse of, that people are not forgetting about him, that he's on so many people's minds.
And how much of the politics between the U.S. and Russia are playing a part in this? Because we can't ignore, the elephant in the room. Much as President Biden has said something and declared this as totally illegal, there are politics at play here that exist between the two countries.
Right. I mean, I think it would be, naive to think that these politics and the sort of general tension between the U.S. and Russia don't play a part here. But I think what we want to focus on is that, Evan is a journalist. He was not working for the U.S. government. He's not a representative of the government or any kind of political view on, what is happening in Russia and in the world. He was doing his job, and he should not be punished for it. In fact, he was accredited by the Russian Foreign Ministry as a journalist. So he had, government permission to do what he was doing, which was reporting on Russia.
And Nanette, just tell us, what are you doing to keep the story alive as a Wall Street, to make sure that this story does not die down and we don't forget about Evan?
Well, first of all, we're just covering it left, right, and center. This is a big news story, in addition to obviously touching all of us really, really personally. We've been going on social media, going on media programs such as yours to just draw attention and make sure that people don't forget about him. We are, just talking to everybody possible to just call out the wrong that is being inflicted on our colleague who is a journalist and who was just doing his job.
All right. Gabriele, Godspeed. Thank you so much for talking to us. Good luck to you and the team. Hopefully we'll hear from Evan and he'll be returning home very, very soon. That was Wall Street Journal's Deputy Bureau Chief for Africa, Gabriele Steinhauser, speaking to us about the detention of Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich in Russia.